The massive Imperial vessel hung in Earth's orbit like a metallic wasp. Its sharp angles and dark metal were designed to make planets surrender before a single shot was fired. Admiral Tadwan stood on the command deck, his 8-foot frame perfectly still as he observed the blue planet below. Primitive, he noted, his mandibles clicking softly. Yet another world to add to Emperor Minho's collection. Behind him, the bridge crew worked in perfect silence. The Galactic Empire had conquered over 300 worlds in the past century alone. Earth would be no different. The humans had only recently discovered faster-than-light communication and had no knowledge of the vast imperial territories that surrounded their solar system. Captain Juri approached with a data tablet. Her exoskeleton was a lighter shade of green than Taiwan's, marking her slightly lower rank. "The subjugation protocols are prepared, Admiral," she said. "The landing party awaits your command." Taiwan's compound eyes shimmered as he turned from the view screen. "Excellent. I will lead the first contact delegation myself. This is a Class 7 civilization, barely worth sending a junior officer, but I find these moments enjoyable." "Of course, Admiral," Juri replied, her antennae dipping respectfully. "The humans have agreed to meet our delegation in a place called Geneva. Their communications indicate they believe this to be a peaceful first contact scenario." Taiwan made a sound that passed for laughter among his species, a dry clicking of his secondary mandibles. "They always do. Prepare my ceremonial armor and the sacred texts of submission. Today we add another star to our maps." The Imperial shuttle cut through Earth's atmosphere with precision. Inside, Taiwan stood as attendants attached the final pieces of his black ceremonial armor. Golden symbols of conquest decorated the chestplate, each marking representing a world that had fallen to him personally. "The standard protocol will suffice," he told his delegation. "I will recite the 18 declarations of imperial dominance. You will present the artifacts of submission. The humans will weep, as is tradition." The 6 officers around him nodded in unison. "Remember," Taiwan continued, "these primitives may be shocked by our appearance. We must be firm. Any sign of weakness could lead to unnecessary resistance." The shuttle landed with a soft hiss on the manicured lawn outside the United Nations building in Geneva. Human security forces had created a perimeter, and world leaders had gathered for what they believed would be humanity's welcome to the galactic community. Taiwan waited until the delegation was in formation before the door opened. He stepped out into Earth's sunlight, his armored form casting a long shadow. A gasp went up from the assembled humans. The Admiral stood nearly twice as tall as the average person, his insectoid features and multiple limbs, unlike anything in Earth's evolutionary history. "Perfect," he thought. "The fear response is universal." A human in formal attire stepped forward. "On behalf of the people of Earth, I welcome you to our planet. I am Secretary General Yunho of the United Nations." Taiwan did not acknowledge the greeting. Instead, he raised all 4 of his arms and began the ancient ritual that had begun the subjugation of hundreds of worlds. "Tremble, creatures of Earth," he began, his translator converting his clicks and hisses into booming English. "Your world now belongs to the glorious Galactic Empire of 1,000 suns." He paused for effect. This was usually when the primitive leaders would fall to their knees. Instead, he heard a sound, a strange sound that his translator could not immediately identify. Someone was laughing. Taiwan continued, his voice rising. "Your resources are now ours by right of cosmic conquest. Your pupil shall serve the Emperor Minho, light of the TCV in galaxies, destroyer of rebellion, collector of worlds." The sound grew. More humans were making it now. Taiwan faltered slightly but pressed on. "Resistance is both futile and forbidden. The Empire's might spans the void between stars. Our warships below out suns. Our armies menarch across the. Now many of the human leaders were openly laughing. Some were covering their mouths, trying to be polite, but others had given up all pretense. One woman in formal military dress was actually wiping tears from her eyes. Taiwan stopped mid-sentence, genuinely confused for the first time in his 300-year career as a conquest admiral. The Secretary General stepped forward again, composing himself with visible effort. "I'm terribly sorry, but are you doing a bit? Is this some kind of traditional greeting?" A human in a blue suit called out, "When's your next comedy tour date? I'd buy tickets." This prompted another round of laughter from the assembled leaders. Taiwan's mandibles clicked rapidly in confusion and growing anger. He turned to Captain Jure, switching to their native language. "What is happening? Why are they making those sounds?" Jure's compound eyes darted nervously. "I believe it is called laughter, Admiral. A physiological response to something they find amusing." "Amusing?" Taiwan hissed. "I am reciting the sacred submission address, the text that has brought emperors and queens to their knees across the galaxy." Another officer leaned in. "Sir, our cultural database indicates that human entertainment often involves exaggerated threats and dramatic posturing for comic effect. They may believe this is a form of performance art." Taiwan was speechless. In 3 centuries of conquest, no species had ever laughed at the Empire's arrival. Fear, yes. Pleading, certainly. Immediate surrender, most commonly. But laughter, it was unprecedented. He raised his arms once more, determined to regain control of the situation. "Silence. You will be authority might of the Empire, or FAC's obliteration." This only made the laughter worse. One elderly human leader had to be given water as he choked on his own amusement. The Secretary General approached again, still fighting to control his smile. "Perhaps we should restart this discussion, maybe in a smaller setting, without the theatrical elements." Taiwan's anger reached its limit. "This meeting is concluded. You will regret this disrespect, creatures of Earth." He signaled to his delegation, and they retreated to their shuttle with as much dignity as possible. Behind them, the humans continued to laugh. Once inside the shuttle, Taiwan ripped off pieces of his ceremonial armor in rage. "They laughed at us. The primitives actually laughed during the sacred submission address." Jure's compound eyes widened in concern. "Impossible. No species has ever." One of their leaders asked if we were doing a bit, and another inquired about our comedy tour dates. Taiwan's antennae twitched wildly in confusion and embarrassment. "Prepare the cultural analysis team. Something is very wrong with these humans." As the shuttle lifted off, Taiwan stared out the viewport at the blue planet below. For the first time in his long career, he felt uncertain. The Empire had faced resistance before, even rebellion. But ridicule, laughter, this was new territory, and he had no protocol for it. "Jure," he said finally, "send a message to the Emperor. Tell him." He hesitated. "Tell him we may have encountered a unique situation that requires special consideration." "And the subjugation timeline?" she asked. Taiwan's mandibles clicked softly. "Delayed. Indefinitely." Back on Earth, the human leaders watched the shuttle depart. The laughter had mostly subsided now, replaced by puzzled looks and concerned whispers. "Did we just meet actual aliens who tried to conquer us with a B-movie villain speech?" asked one leader. The Secretary General nodded slowly. "I believe we did, and I'm not sure if that's the best or worst first contact scenario possible." "What do we do now?" asked another. "Prepare," the Secretary General said. "They'll be back. And next time, they might not be so accidentally funny." 2 weeks after the embarrassing first contact incident, the Galactic Empire changed its approach. If intimidation wouldn't work, they would try a more subtle method: A small delegation of Imperial administrators arrived on Earth with a new mission: begin the process of quietly establishing control through official channels. Administrator Hyun-Ki led the team. He was shorter than Admiral Ta-1, with a pale blue exoskeleton instead of green. His compound eyes were smaller, and he had only 4 limbs instead of 6. The Empire had chosen him specifically because he looked less threatening to humans. Remember, Hyun-Ki told his 3 assistants as their shuttle approached the United Nations building, "We are not conquerors today. We are bureaucrats. The humans will not laugh at paperwork." The Empire had conquered hundreds of worlds using this approach when direct intimidation failed. First, establish a small presence. Then slowly expand control through legal agreements the natives didn't fully understand. By the time the local species realized what had happened, it was too late. They were already part of the Empire. Secretary General Yunho greeted them in a small conference room. "Welcome back," he said with a slight smile. "I appreciate this more conventional approach to diplomacy." Hyun-Ki bowed slightly. "The Admiral's methods are traditional, but perhaps not suited to your species. I am here to establish more practical relations between our civilizations." "Excellent," Yunho replied. "I've asked Director Park from our Bureau of Extraterrestrial Affairs to assist you with the necessary procedures." A woman in a crisp business suit entered carrying a tablet. "Director Jae-young Park." She introduced herself with a polite bow. "I understand you wish to establish an Imperial presence on Earth." "Yes," Hyun-Ki said, feeling relieved. This was going much better. "We require a small compound of approximately 5 square kilometers to serve as our embassy and monitoring station." Director Park nodded pleasantly. "Of course, we have several possible locations, but first, we'll need to process the standard paperwork." She tapped her tablet, and a printer in the corner of the room began to hum. It didn't stop for nearly 10 minutes. By the time it finished, a stack of papers nearly half a meter high sat on the conference table. Director Park placed it in front of Hyun-Ki with a pleasant smile. "These are just the preliminary environmental impact forms," she explained. "We'll need them completed in triplicate before we can proceed to the jurisdictional review." Hyun-Ki stared at the tower of papers. His antennae twitched in confusion. "But we only wish to establish a small military outpost," he protested. "Of course, but you'll need zoning permits, which requires a public comment period of 90 days. Oh, and these tax registration forms." She pulled another thick sheaf from her briefcase. "Tax forms." Hyun-Ki's mandibles clicked in surprise. The Galactic Empire does not pay taxes to subject worlds. Director Park's smile didn't waver. "I understand completely. However, under Earth's international law, even diplomatic missions must file certain tax exemption forms. Without them, you would be subject to our standard tax rates." One of Hyun-Ki's assistants leaned close to him. "Sir, our cultural analysis suggests that human bureaucracy is unusually complex. But surely not this complex." Hyun-Ki nodded and addressed Director Park again. "Perhaps we could expedite this process. The Empire is willing to provide significant technological benefits in exchange for cooperation." "I would love to help," she said, sounding genuinely apologetic. "But I'm afraid these forms are mandatory. Skipping them would violate at least 17 international treaties and approximately 300 local regulations." Hyun-Ki felt his confidence wavering. The Empire had never encountered such resistance in the form of paperwork. Usually, a few simple documents were signed, and the process of imperial integration began. This was different. "How long will this process take?" he asked. Director Park consulted her tablet. "Well, assuming all forms are filled out correctly the first time, which rarely happens, and there are no public objections during the comment periods, perhaps 6 to 8 months for preliminary approval." 8 months. Hyun-Ki's voice rose to a pitch that made the humans wince. "That would just be for the initial land use permit," Director Park added. "Construction permits would be a separate process. Oh, and since you mentioned a military component, that would require additional security clearances from every nation in the UN Security Council. Hyun-Ki turned to his team, switching to the Imperial language. Is she serious? Check our database on human governance. His assistants quickly consulted their devices. Sir, one reported, it appears humans have developed bureaucratic systems of unprecedented complexity. Their civilization produces more forms, permits, and regulations than any we have encountered. Another assistant added, according to initial scans, humans spend approximately 1/3 of their productive hours dealing with paperwork and regulatory compliance. Hyun-Ki turned back to Director Park. We will take these forms and begin the process, he said stiffly. Over the next week, Hyun-Ki and his team tried to navigate the human bureaucratic maze. For every form they completed, 3 more seemed to appear. When they submitted environmental impact statements, they were told they needed cultural impact assessments as well. When they provided technical specifications for their planned facility, they were informed that 17 different safety codes might apply, each requiring separate compliance documentation. During a particularly frustrating meeting, Hyun-Ki discovered that humans had something called lawyers, specialized bureaucrats whose sole purpose was to interpret and complicate written regulations. You'll need legal representation, a human official explained. Otherwise, you might miss critical clauses in the international settlement agreements. The Empire has diplomatic immunity, Hyun-Ki protested. Of course, the official agreed, but you'll need to file Form D-447B to properly assert that immunity, and it must be notarized by both Imperial and Earth authorities. When Hyun-Ki asked what notarized meant, the explanation took 45 minutes and ended with the need for yet another form. 2 weeks into the mission, Hyun-Ki received a message from Imperial Command requesting a status update. He stared at his communication device for a long time, trying to explain the inexplicable. Finally, he composed the shortest report of his career. Humans have weaponized bureaucracy beyond anything in known space. He added a request for a team of Imperial legal specialists and form processing droids. He estimated they would need at least 50 of each. That evening, Hyun-Ki sat in his temporary quarters, surrounded by stacks of partially completed forms. His antennae drooped with exhaustion. They are not primitive at all, he told his chief assistant. This paperwork system, it's brilliant. No species could invade them successfully. They would be buried in forms before they could establish a foothold. His assistant nodded. I've been analyzing their regulatory history. It appears to have evolved naturally, without any defensive purpose. They do this to themselves. Hyun-Ki's mandibles clicked in disbelief. Impossible. No rational species would create such a system for themselves. Yet they have, the assistant replied. And they thrive within it. While we have been struggling with these forms, they have processed thousands of others for their own purposes. Hyun-Ki looked out the window at the city lights of Geneva. For the first time, he felt something the Empire rarely experienced: doubt. If humans could master such complexity in their governance, what other surprises might they hold? He turned back to the stack of papers on his desk and reluctantly picked up his pen. The conquest of Earth would not be achieved through traditional means. It would be fought with paperwork, one form at a time. And the humans, it seemed, had all the ammunition. After the bureaucratic approach bogged down in endless paperwork, the Galactic Empire tried a new strategy. Perhaps understanding human culture better would reveal weaknesses they could exploit. The Imperial Cultural Exchange Program was launched, with cultural attaché Ji-Woo leading the mission. Ji-Woo was chosen for her analytical mind and extensive background in species integration. Her exoskeleton was a rare purple shade, indicating her specialist status in the Empire's hierarchy. She had helped incorporate 12 different alien cultures into the Empire over her 60-year career. Humans are just another primitive species, she assured her team as they established their cultural research center in a building provided by the United Nations. We will study their art, their entertainment, their social structures. We will find the leverage points needed to peacefully integrate them into the Empire. The humans seemed pleased with this approach. Many nations sent cultural representatives to share their music, literature, and traditions. Ji-Woo's team meticulously cataloged everything, looking for the usual patterns they found on conquest worlds: reverence for authority, fear of the unknown, and rigid social hierarchies that could be manipulated. Instead, they found chaos. During their third week on Earth, Ji-Woo organized a special screening of popular human entertainment to better understand their values. Her team gathered in their viewing room as the lights dimmed. She had selected what the humans called a late-night comedy show that appeared to be widely watched. The program began with a human making jokes about the planet's most powerful leader. The comedian imitated the leader's voice and mannerisms in an exaggerated way, drawing laughter from the audience. Cultural attaché Ji-Woo watched in horror as the human comedy show played on the screen. The imperial delegates around her sat in confused silence. They mocked their own leaders, whispered her assistant, Q1, openly, and their leaders, laugh along. Worse, Ji-Woo replied, I've been studying their internet. It's filled with something called memes that spread rebellion through humor. She tapped her datapad to show Q1 a collection of images with text that mocked various authority figures. This behavior would be punishable by exile in the Empire. Here, it seems to be not just tolerated but encouraged. Another researcher leaned forward. Perhaps it's a controlled release, a way for the ruling class to let the lower classes vent frustration without actual rebellion. Ji-Woo shook her head. I thought so too, until I found their historical records. Multiple human governments have been overthrown because they became the subject of too many jokes. Their humor isn't just entertainment, it's a social weapon. The team watched in stunned silence as the comedy show continued, targeting everything humans claim to respect: religion, wealth, power, even the concept of respect itself. After the screening, Ji-Woo called an emergency meeting. We need to understand this better. Each of you will immerse yourselves in different aspects of human humor. Report back in 3 days. The Imperial researchers scattered across Earth's information networks and entertainment venues. They watched comedy films, studied joke structures, analyzed memes, and even attended live performances. What they found alarmed them all. 3 days later, the team gathered to share their findings. Their mood was somber. Humans use something called sarcasm, reported one researcher. It means saying the opposite of what you mean in a particular tone. It undermines all direct communication protocols. I can no longer tell when they're being sincere. Another researcher looked troubled. They have comedy forms specifically designed to mock the powerful. They call it satire. The more authoritarian a leader acts, the more they become targets for this satire. Their young people communicate almost entirely through these memes, added a third researcher. Ideas spread faster through humor than through official channels. It's chaotic but effective. Ji-Woo listened with growing concern. The Empire relied on clear communication hierarchies and respect for authority. Human humor seems specifically designed to disrupt both. We must ensure our own personnel remain unaffected, she declared. No unauthorized exposure to human comedy. We cannot risk contamination. But it was already too late. The next morning, Ji-Woo entered the research center to find 2 junior officers in the break area. They were making strange hand gestures she didn't recognize and laughing. What is the meaning of this behavior? She demanded. The officers straightened immediately, but one couldn't suppress a slight mandible twitch, the imperial equivalent of a smile. Nothing of concern, cultural attaché, he replied. Just discussing the supply inventory. Ji-Woo was about to move on when the second officer added, That's what she said. Both officers immediately erupted in clicking laughter. What did you say? Ji-Woo's antennae stiffened in shock. I apologize, cultural attaché, the officer replied, trying to regain composure. It's a human joke format. When someone says something that could have a different meaning in a, he hesitated, reproductive context, they add that's what she said. Jiawu was horrified. This is completely inappropriate. You are representatives of the Empire. Of course, cultural attaché. The first officer replied seriously. Then, under his breath but still audible, he added, "That's what she said." Both officers lost their composure again. Jiawu rushed to her office and sent an urgent message to Imperial Command. Human humor spreading among junior staff. Request immediate personnel rotation and containment protocols. Over the next few days, Jiawu noticed more concerning signs. Officers were using human slang. Some had downloaded human comedy specials to their personal devices. One senior researcher was caught creating what appeared to be a meme about Admiral Ta Wan's failed first contact. Most alarming of all, the traditional morning salute to the Emperor's hologram was interrupted when someone in the back row whispered "Ok Boomer," a human phrase Jiawu had learned was a dismissive reference to older generations. She called Q1 to her office for an emergency consultation. "The situation is worse than we feared," Jiawu said, pacing nervously. "Human humor is spreading through our ranks like a virus. It undermines everything the Empire stands for: hierarchy, obedience, unwavering loyalty." Q1's antennae drooped. "What can we do? We can't exactly quarantine the entire research team." "I've asked Imperial Command for guidance," Jiawu replied. But their response was, she hesitated, concerning. She showed Q1 the message she had received. Situation noted. Maintain observation. Consider potential military applications of humor as psychological weapon. Emperor Minho finds the concept of memes intriguing. Q1's compound eyes widened. The Emperor is interested in human humor. This is unprecedented. "It gets worse," Jiawu said. "Look at this." She played a video message from an Imperial Youth Center on the homeworld. Young Imperial citizens were imitating human dance moves and using phrases like "epic fail" to describe their education modules. "The contamination is spreading beyond Earth," Jiawu whispered. "Human culture is infecting our society through the communication channels we established. Their chaos is contagious." Q1 was silent for a long moment. "Perhaps we should reconsider our approach to Earth. If their cultural influence is this powerful, direct control might be impossible." Jiawu looked out the window at the human city beyond. "For the first time in my career, I fear we may have encountered a species we cannot safely integrate into the Empire. Their humor doesn't just entertain them, it protects them from control." Later that week, she caught 2 more junior officers making strange hand gestures and saying "that's what she said" after routine announcements. The human infection was spreading, and Jiawu was running out of ideas to stop it. That night, alone in her quarters, Jiawu did something she had never done in her 60 years of service to the Empire. She opened her personal communication channel and sent a message directly to Emperor Minho, bypassing the chain of command entirely. The message contained a single line: "Human culture cannot be contained. Recommend immediate withdrawal from Earth to prevent further contamination." As she waited for the inevitable reprimand for violating protocol, Jiawu found herself doing something unexpected. She was watching human comedy videos, and worse, she was beginning to understand why they were funny. After months of failed diplomatic efforts and cultural contamination, the Empire's high command lost patience. The order came directly from Emperor Minho himself. Demonstrate imperial military superiority through limited tactical engagement. General Deho was chosen to lead the operation. With 6 golden bands on his dark red exoskeleton, he was one of the Empire's most decorated military commanders. He had conquered 17 worlds personally and crushed 32 rebellions. His battle cruiser, the Imperial Fist, moved into position on the dark side of Earth's moon, hidden from human detection. A simple operation, Deho explained to his officers in the command center. "We will neutralize one small military installation to demonstrate our capabilities. No permanent damage, minimal casualties. The humans will recognize our technological superiority and reconsider their resistance. The plan targeted a remote military base in a desert region. The Empire would jam communications, disable power systems, and deploy a small force of 20 elite soldiers. They would capture the base commander, leave Imperial markers, and withdraw before reinforcements could arrive. This approach has succeeded on 43 previous worlds. Daho reminded his team, once humans understand resistance is futile, they will accept our authority. The operation began at local midnight. The Imperial ship deployed jamming signals to cut off the base from outside communication. Power systems were disabled by targeted electromagnetic pulses. Dropships delivered the strike team precisely on target. Everything went perfectly until the soldiers actually entered the base. They found it nearly empty. Most of the human personnel appeared to have left hours earlier. Those who remained seemed completely unconcerned by the power outage or the presence of alien troops. Several were gathered around devices running on backup power, watching something and making loud sounds, laughing. The squad leader reported back to the Imperial Fist. Base secured, General, but something is wrong. The humans don't seem afraid. Daho frowned. Find the base commander. Bring them to me. Sir, according to their logs, most personnel were given something called a 3-day weekend for something called April Fool's Day. April Fools. Daho's antennae twitched in confusion. Before his officers could respond, the main view screen on the bridge flickered. The jamming systems that should have blocked all transmissions somehow failed. The screen filled with an image of a small furry earth creature moving in a rhythmic way. What is this? Daho demanded. Lieutenant Minji checked her console. It appears to be broadcasting on all frequencies, sir. It's replacing our communications. More screens activated around the bridge. All showed different Earth animals in various activities. Many were small felines in amusing situations. General Daho slammed his fist on the tactical display. How? How have they disabled our communications array? Lieutenant Minji hesitated before answering. They hacked our emergency broadcast system and replaced all signals with something called cat videos and rickrolls. Sir, restore communications immediately, Daho ordered. We're trying, sir, but the humans have introduced some kind of self-replicating code. When we block one signal, 3 more appear. Daho turned to his second-in-command. What about our ground forces? They're requesting extraction, sir. They report the humans are laughing at them. Laughing at Imperial elite forces. Daho couldn't believe what he was hearing. And why are our ground troops reporting confusion? He demanded. The humans have been dropping leaflets with jokes about our exoskeletons, sir. Morale is collapsing. 3 units have requested transfer rather than face more human comedy warfare. Daho stared out the viewport at Earth below. We've conquered 1,000 worlds, but never encountered weapons like laughter. He ordered one of the leaflets transmitted to the command ship. When he read it, his mandibles clicked in disbelief. Why did the Imperial soldier cross the road? The leaflet read, because his exoskeleton was too tight on the other side. Another showed a cartoon of an Imperial soldier trying to sit in a human chair, with the caption, "This is why they're so cranky." These are not weapons, Daho muttered. These are jokes. But the effect on his troops was undeniable. Reports came in of soldiers refusing to leave their dropships. Others requested psychological evaluation. One squad reported that humans were making buzzing sounds when Imperial troops walked past. Sir, Lieutenant Minji reported, human media is broadcasting our presence, but they're not treating it as an invasion. They're calling it Alien Prank Day. Daho's compound eyes narrowed. Prank. A form of humor involving practical jokes, sir. The humans think we scheduled our military operation to coincide with their April Fool's Day deliberately. The general's antennae went rigid with anger. This is not a joke. This is an Imperial military action. The situation deteriorated further when human civilians began approaching the base. Rather than running in fear, they carried signs welcoming the alien visitors and offering free exoskeleton polishing. Some wore costumes mimicking Imperial appearance. One of Daho's senior officers approached cautiously. "Sir, we may have a bigger problem. Our ship's entertainment systems have been compromised." "Entertainment systems are not critical to military operations," Daho dismissed. "Sir, the propaganda broadcasts that play in crew quarters. They've been replaced with human comedy shows. Half the night shift watched something called Saturday Night Live instead of the Emperor's inspirational address." Daho felt his confidence wavering. The Empire had faced resistance before: weapon fire, sabotage, even suicide attacks. But mockery? How did one fight an enemy that wouldn't take you seriously? "Order all ground forces to withdraw," he finally commanded. "We will regroup and develop a new strategy." As the dropships returned to the Imperial Fist, Daho received the most disturbing report yet. The soldiers who had been on the ground were behaving strangely. Several were making the human laughing sound. Others were sharing the joke leaflets with crew members who hadn't been deployed. "Quarantine all returning personnel," Daho ordered. "Full decontamination protocols." "Sir," Lieutenant Minji said hesitantly, "I don't think you can decontaminate an idea." Daho turned to face her. "What do you mean?" "The humans have found our weakness, sir. The Empire depends on fear and respect. But humans use humor to overcome fear. Once our troops stop being afraid of looking ridiculous, the Empire loses power over them." The general considered her words carefully. In 300 years of military service, he had never considered humor a strategic threat. Yet here they were, a mighty Imperial force retreating because they couldn't bear being laughed at. "Return to orbit," he ordered. "I must consult with High Command." As the Imperial Fist pulled away from Earth's moon, Daho composed his report. He spent hours trying to explain the inexplicable, how a technologically inferior species had repelled an Imperial force without firing a single shot. In the end, he wrote simply, "The humans possess psychological weapons we cannot counter. Recommend full withdrawal and revaluation of conquest strategy." Before sending the message, he hesitated, then added, "Warning: human cultural influence highly contagious. Crew showing signs of contamination after minimal contact." As if to prove his point, he heard something that had never before been heard on an Imperial warship: laughter coming from the crew quarters. And worse, he realized part of him wanted to understand what was so funny. Daho stared out the viewport at the blue planet below. For the first time in his centuries-long career, he had encountered an enemy he wasn't sure how to fight. The Grand Council chamber of the Galactic Empire stretched for nearly a kilometer, its black crystal walls reflecting the light of 5 artificial suns. 10,000 delegates from conquered worlds sat in rigid hierarchical arrangements. At the center, raised on a platform of rare metals, sat the 60 members of the Elder Council. Elder Council member Hejun's purple-black exoskeleton showed the wear of his 400 years. He stood slowly, his 4 arms raised in the traditional gesture of imperial authority. The chamber fell silent. "We face an unprecedented crisis," he began, his voice amplified throughout the vast space. "The human situation has become untenable. Their influence spreads like a virus through our younger generations." Murmurs spread through the chamber. Everyone had heard the reports from Earth. 3 failed attempts at conquest. A cultural contamination that had somehow breached Imperial quarantine protocols. Our youth now question traditions that have sustained our empire for 10,000 years. Hejun continued. They share these human memes. They speak of individual rights. Some even openly laugh during the Emperor's addresses. The older delegates clicked their mandibles in shock and disapproval. "I propose a final solution," Hejun declared. "A complete blockade of the Earth system. All personnel who have had contact with humans must undergo memory adjustment. We must burn out this infection before it destroys everything we have built." Approving clicks sounded from the Elder Council. This was the traditional Imperial approach to dangerous species: isolation and containment. But then something unprecedented happened. From the back of the chamber, a young delegate named Su Min stood. Her light green exoskeleton marked her as barely 100 years old, practically a child by imperial standards. Such a junior member speaking without recognition was unheard of. "Perhaps," she said, her voice clear despite the disapproving clicks, "we should consider their proposal of mutual cooperation rather than conquest." The chamber erupted in angry buzzing. "Blasphemy!" cried another elder, Jaz Seong, his mandibles clicking furiously. "Sit down, child. You speak of things you cannot understand." But Su Min did not sit. "I have studied the human transmissions. They do not wish to destroy us. They offer a different path. Voluntary exchange rather than forced submission. The Empire does not cooperate. It rules," Jae Seong shouted. Before the elders could call for Su Min's removal, another young delegate stood, then another, and another. One by one, across the chamber, younger delegates rose to their feet. "I have watched human entertainment. It brings joy without control," said one. "Their system of elected leaders allows for peaceful transfer of power," added another. "Their diversity makes them stronger, not weaker," declared a third. The elders watched in shock as nearly 1,000 delegates, all under 200 years old, stood in silent support of Su Min's words. Emperor Jinho, who typically remained silent during council debates, leaned forward on his crystalline throne. At 500 years old, he had overseen the conquest of 87 worlds. "This is most irregular," he said, his deep voice silencing the chamber. "Yet I find myself curious. Delegate Su Min, approach and explain why we should abandon 10 millennia of successful imperial expansion." The young delegate walked forward, every step an act of courage. Imperial protocol dictated that junior members should never approach the emperor directly. "Majesty," she began, her antennae dipping respectfully, "the humans have shown us something we have never seen before. A society that thrives on change rather than fearing it. They have no emperor, yet they advance faster than we do. They mock their leaders, yet remain loyal to their nations. They embrace disagreement rather than punishing it." She paused, then added, "And they have defeated 3 imperial missions without destroying a single ship or taking a single life. They did it with paperwork, humor, and what they call memes." The emperor's compound eyes studied her intently. "And you believe we should cooperate with such chaos?" "I believe we should learn from it," Su Min replied. "For 10,000 years, the empire has grown through conquest. But each new world brings the same knowledge, the same obedience, the same fear. The humans offer something new, genuine innovation, born from freedom." The chamber remained silent as the emperor considered her words. Finally, he turned to the elder council. "Prepare a new mission to Earth," he ordered. "Not conquest, not study, but genuine diplomatic exchange. I wish to understand these humans better before making a final decision." 6 months later, the imperial capital world looked remarkably different. Human diplomatic missions had established cultural exchange centers. Imperial citizens, particularly the young, flocked to learn about Earth customs, art, and most especially, humor. The humans, for their part, seemed genuinely interested in imperial architecture, science, and history. They asked questions no imperial citizen would dare to ask. They suggested improvements to imperial technology that proved surprisingly effective. Most shocking of all, they treated Emperor Jinho not with fear or even proper deference, but with something approaching friendly respect. They joked in his presence. They asked about his personal opinions. They treated him as if he were simply a person. An important one, but still just a person. And strangest of all, the emperor seemed to enjoy it. The transformation reached its peak with an event that would have been unthinkable a year earlier, the first Imperial Comedy Festival. A vast amphitheater in the capital was filled with imperial citizens of all ages. Human comedians demonstrated the art of stand-up comedy, followed by brave imperial citizens attempting their first public jokes. Emperor Jinho himself attended, seated not on his traditional throne, but in a simple chair among his citizens. As the festival reached its conclusion, something truly revolutionary happened. The emperor approached the stage. "I wish to try this stand-up routine myself," he announced. A shocked silence fell over the crowd. The emperor had never performed for his subjects. He had never needed to entertain them or seek their approval. He began awkwardly, his joke structure clearly memorized from human examples. "Why did the imperial administrator cross the galaxy?" he asked. After a perfect comedic pause, he answered, "Because the paperwork on this side was already finished." It wasn't particularly funny by human standards. The punchline was predictable, the delivery stiff. But something remarkable happened. His citizens laughed anyway. It was tentative at first, then grew louder as they realized the emperor was actually trying to make them laugh rather than demanding their fear. Jinho seemed pleased by the response. He tried another joke, then another. With each attempt, he grew slightly more comfortable, and his subjects' laughter became more genuine. In the audience, Elder Hejun watched with a mixture of horror and fascination. "The empire is changing," he whispered to his aide. "Everything we have built for 10,000 years is becoming something new," the aide finished. "Perhaps something better." On the far side of the amphitheater, Su Min watched with quiet satisfaction. Next to her sat a human diplomat who leaned over and whispered, "You know, on Earth, political change usually takes generations. You've managed it in under a year." Su Min's mandibles clicked in the imperial equivalent of a smile. The empire has always prided itself on efficiency. As Emperor Jinho finished his routine to enthusiastic applause, he made a final announcement that sent shockwaves through imperial society. "I have decided to establish an imperial council of voices," he declared. "Each world in the empire will elect representatives to advise me directly, including," he added, "representatives from Earth, should they choose to join us as equals rather than subjects." The crowd's reaction was mixed. Shocked silence from the older citizens, excited buzzing from the young. But as the emperor left the stage, something unprecedented happened. Instead of bowing in fearful respect, his citizens applauded him. They showed their approval not because they had to, but because they chose to. It wasn't revolution. It wasn't conquest. It was something the empire had never experienced before. Evolution. Voluntary change embraced rather than resisted. And it had all begun with laughter. 6 months after the first Imperial Comedy Festival, enrollment in human language courses had increased by 4,000% across the empire. Imperial trading vessels visited Earth regularly, returning with not just goods but ideas. The feared cultural contamination had become cultural exchange. And Emperor Jinho continued practicing his comedy routines, improving slowly but steadily. It wasn't particularly funny, but his citizens laughed anyway. It was a start.